The 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children may have wrapped up yesterday, but this goes without saying. Violence against women and children continues to dominate the headlines.
That's right. Last month, Police Minister Bheki Cele said over 10,000 rape cases were reported to police between July and September. Do we need different thinking or a mindset change to combat the scourge of gender-based violence? We're joined now by Dr. Amanda Gous, who's the chairperson of the South African Research Initiative in Gender Politics at Stellenbosch University. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your time this morning. And again, it goes to say that South Africa, we're really good at being able to commemorate, to celebrate, to put the spotlight for that 16 days on gender-based violence and no violence and the like. But the problem happens after the 16 days of activism. And are we still activists in our own right after the 16 days has passed? And what do we need to conscientize society at just about changing the status quo?
Good morning. Yeah, well, I think the problem with dealing with gender-based violence is that the policy of the South African government is the incarceration. In other words, you keep individuals responsible for the violence after it's happened and you put a rapist in jail. Now, that does not deal with the systemic problems that underlie the violence and the causes of the violence. So activism needs to go on 365 days of the year. 16 days have turned into events where we talk about the violence. There's a lot of rhetoric, but we don't actually deal with it. And you know, the point is that it's over 40,000, sometimes 60,000 reported rapes a year. So it's an enormous statistic. But what we need is a multifaceted approach to the violence, because there are many different reasons and causes for the violence. And I don't think we speak about the violence enough, and we do not do enough education, specifically with boys, because as long as men believe that it's not their problem, it's not going to change.
You speak about it being a systemic problem, and I think that is probably the operative phrase here that we need to use, is that we can pay lip service until we're pink in our faces about gender-based violence, but we're not really getting to the heart of the issue. And another point you've raised is that, you know, we need to be talking to the boys, you know, because talking to the men at this point, especially the grown men, probably seems futile, because they genuinely do not think that let me not even say we do not think that it is our problem. So we need to be speaking to the boys. But what are we saying to the boys? I think it's one thing to speak to the boys, but what is being said to them? I think perhaps the wording that we use, the approach that we use, you know, it shouldn't be a thing of do not hit a girl. It kind of, you know, lands on deaf ears, I've come to find, especially as a father of a son myself. But what are we saying? What kind of language can we now be using to the young boy to change what is happening in society?
Well, I think it needs to be about respect and teaching children that we cannot solve problems through violence and with violence. So it's about respect, and also about the difference between relationships and intimacy. Intimacy is not the same as being in a relationship with someone. So gender-based violence, and specifically rape, is not about desire and intimacy. It's about power and domination. So children need to learn about the difference between being in a relationship with someone or having just casual sex with someone and being in, you know, having an intimate relationship. And we do not talk about that enough. Even in the social or sexual orientation courses in schools, it's about the mechanics and the birds and the bees, but it never goes beyond that to make children understand what it means to respect the body of somebody else. You know, the objectification of women's bodies is so prevalent and so rife. I mean, children now have access to pornography, and what they see is those images, and sometimes very violent images, about what they may think sex is about. But that is not what sex is about.
Sure. You know, these are very real kind of anecdotes that we're talking about here, Amanda, and I want to label with what Morena was saying. There are genuinely men in this country who believe that they've got the right to own a woman's body. There are genuinely men who believe that as long as I bring the bacon and I bring home the money and you are under my roof, you will respect my orders and the way that we live. Genuinely are, who without fear, no favor, are able to carry out that abuse without, and nobody's going to kind of call them out, because if everybody's doing it, then who's going to call whoever out? And on the other side of it as well, it's men being afraid to call out their own friends because they want to be able to respect the boundaries of relationships, right? So what is needed to almost rewire? And is there even a willingness to be rewired by, let's not even say the boys, by those that are, let's say, 25 up, right? Is there a willingness to rewire their thinking and their approaches to relationship and relationship between man and woman?
Well, if we talk about the notion of toxic masculinity, then we see we have a very serious problem in South Africa. And the problem of social exclusion and poverty means that frustrations very often gets taken out on those who are weaker, and that's women and children. So we have to start at a place where we have to work with these stereotypes that men are always the breadwinners and women are, the ones who make homes and stay at home and don't work. Because if we look at what is the norm in South Africa, it is single-headed, women-headed households with children, where there are not even men involved. So boys also lack positive role models. But I don't think there is a desire to be rewired. Violence has become so normalized that we accept it. It's only the most gruesome and violent and brutal attacks that we report in the newspapers. But the rest goes just unreported. And so we have to, as a society, start to think what it is that we want. And that's where, we have to talk about the systemic problems. And systemic problems are poverty, inequality, lack of respect for women, and that entitlement to women's bodies that you've mentioned. Men, we call that patriarchal politics. But patriarchal politics actually give men the impression and the idea that they are entitled to women's bodies and to sex with women. And unless we change those perceptions, we're going to have a very difficult situation in stopping the violence. So we have to have much broader education programs, and we have to have men accept that even if you as a man don't use violence, you don't violate women's bodies, you have to be part of the solution. And that's why calling out, other people who are violent or men who are violent is important. I mean, I always make the analogy with race, right? So many people will not accept racial violence. And we had to learn, many people had to learn that racial violence is not acceptable. So why is it so difficult to think that gender violence is not acceptable?
Dr. Amanda-Gous, just before we let you go, the problem starts and ends with us, men. But there is, between the start and the end, there is the middle. And in that middle, you sometimes find the enabler. And it's not my shifting blame or even putting the account on the corresponding gender, that is women, but there are enablers and some of them are women. And we had a similar conversation last week about this, where especially in the black culture at weddings, you've got the mothers or the aunts or the sisters who will stand there and encourage the patriarchal politics, encourage the groom that they must remember who wears the pants in the relationship. The enabler, Dr. Amanda-Gous, let's talk about that, who sometimes, although the percentage is very small, happens to be the woman.
Now, we shouldn't think that women who live in patriarchal societies do not internalize patriarchal norms. So women get socialized from a very small age, just like boys get socialized into being men and often into toxic masculinity. Women get socialized that they have to be submissive, that they have to listen to their husbands, that they have to be, subordinate. So that's the internalization of patriarchal politics, and women are not immune to that. So it's also, important to call out those women who do that, because they are enabling that type of situation where they perpetuate the stereotypical norms, gender norms, So that of women being submissive and men being dominant and the breadwinners and so on. But we know that that's, like I said, not the norm in South Africa. And we need to actually, also raise consciousness among women.
Yeah. It definitely is a conversation that we need to keep having, one that is very necessary, and especially about dealing with the difficult things about how we need to all take collective responsibility if we're truly to send end to gender-based violence and femicide. Amanda Host, much appreciated, the chair of the South African Research Initiative in Gender Politics at Stellenbosch University. It's very right, though, saying that sometimes the woman is not supposed to hold the knife with the sharp edge.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to hold the knife on a sharp edge. And Khokhotlala is not a proof of sustainability. And no, I don't want to be just a pillar of strength. No. But again, it starts off with us being able to rewire ourselves as a society.
Most definitely.